Rage Badger Gaming here, and today I'm going to teach you how to play the Banner Spear, one of the starting mercenaries from FROSTHAVEN. The Banner Spear is mostly a frontline tank that can jump heavily into its role as a defender, but also can be a striker or a leader as well, capable of bursting out significant damage, providing a lot of support in the form of positive and negative status effects, additionally having quite a few abilities that give it shield. If you want to be kept up to date with all things FROSTHAVEN, including first impressions and an unboxing video, be sure to subscribe to get notified. The Banner Spear is a high health class with a hand size of 10 and has two special mechanics. The hand size of 10 is a little bit deceptive because it doesn't really play like a 10 hand size class. You have a lot of abilities that persist through the whole scenario in the forms of banners and some long persistent effects. You might be relying on perhaps a summon here or there. So although you have a lot of these losses, you have a large amount of powerful non-loss abilities that you will be relying more heavily on. Whereas there are some classes that have a lot of losses that are, I'm going to do something really big this turn. A lot of the Banner Spear losses ended up being more like, this is going to last for the whole scenario. So you have to worry about more conditional positioning for the burst damage instead of just being able to play a lost card. And for that, we're going to get into the first mechanic, formation attacks. Formation attacks require 1 to 2 allies to be in specific spots, and then additionally, at least one enemy within the area of effect of the attack. So if you have at least one enemy in there and exactly the number of allies, most of which is 1, then you can perform the formation attack. All formation attacks give experience, and outside of 1 are non-loss powerful attacks. You can see even the level 1 cards feel highly tuned, but they do require you to be in that very specific position. So if you can line up yourself and your allies around enemies in specific patterns, you'll be able to pull these off. Luckily, you do have a lot of abilities that grant allies movement, so if you ever need to give them a little bit of a boost to get in the right spot, you have that in your toolkit. Additionally, you have another thing called banners. Banners are just lost summons that do not have move and do not have an attack attribute. That's not necessarily a new mechanic, but they do have other cards that interact with these banners, and additionally they have this certain thing in mind of where they don't attack and they don't move. So the only way to move these banners is to give them grant actions or just to leave it in a spot you think is going to be powerful for the rest of the scenario. It's really up to you. The cool part about these banners though is they affect allies nearby, ranging from just adjacent allies to as far as range 3. The earliest banners you get give all allies within range, including yourself since you're an ally of your own banner, +1 to the first attack every round. If you have like a Bone Shaper in your group, getting +1 to the attack of all the skeletons in the area as well as yourself and anyone else you have can quickly add up. Additionally, since they last for the whole scenario, the +1 attack can be really devastating. Not only that, but you've got healing banners, shield banners, and you even have a banner at level 9 that deals damage. So ultimately, because the way the losses and non-losses work for this class, you will be relying heavily on non-losses and using losses sometimes very early and then getting the persistent effect through the whole scenario. Because the Banner Spear has quite a bit of monster movement in the form of lots of pushes and pulls, as well as ally movement in the form of grants, positioning is incredibly key. Luckily, you do have a lot of these, but you have to be deliberate in having enough like bottoms and tops that give you positional things. Now, a lot of the positional stuff is on the bottoms, but you also have just generic moves and even heals and other things on bottom that are nice, including several summons on bottom. However, also this does mean that you have to be sure to deliberately bring bottoms that give you movement, allies movement, that are not also tied to tops that you want to use. It does require you to be a little bit more deliberate when picking your cards, but as long as you bring a few, you should be generally okay. Keep in mind, you do have a couple of non-loss summons. Since they are non-loss summons and on the bottom, this is an easy way for you to create just a 1 hit point thing, have it go ahead, take a hit, and given the lack of hard crowd control we see in a lot of the FROSTHAVEN starters, the ability to just have a summon run ahead and take a hit is almost effectively like a disarm, a non-loss disarm with a bottom at level 1. So just try to keep that in mind as we go forward talking about these cards. Even though you do have a high health pool, you are not a super tank. You have a pretty good card that helps you at low levels tank better, but don't try to run in there and take all the hits, not unless you have the proper setup or you can see that the enemies are performing weaker attacks this round. You still are at least somewhat vulnerable, so still have to play that positioning game, but you do have at least the ability to throw summons ahead, disarm, and do other sorts of fun things that can otherwise disable enemies. We're going to be going through 3 builds here. If you're not sure what to play, the Striker build's always a good pick. The Striker build is largely just, I want to do damage and punch things in the face. If that's all you want to do is just kill enemies, hey, that's actually a really good strategy, especially because the formation attacks have lots of either big areas or heavy numbers. It's pretty solid. You can do quite a bit of damage with the Banner Spear, so that's the first build. We're also going to be doing a Defender build, which is largely only better at larger player counts. It does a little bit less damage, but it's very good at mitigating incoming damage and recovering after the fact. Go Defender if you think your party's vulnerable and you need to take the hits for multiple people, as they may not be able to provide enough space to soak up damage. And lastly, we're going to be doing a leader build, which is kind of like a hybrid of all of it, but it does have a little bit more focus on healing, recovery, and getting allies into position. Because you'll be able to enable allies really well with this build, it's possible that their top and bottom actions will be able to use for something more effective instead of more of the mundane things, and maybe they'll have less movement cards because you will have quite a bit of that in this build as well. So let's get into the cards. At all costs. So this is a mass heal, and it's actually pretty fantastic. Note the phrasing though on the top. The top that says heal 3 all allies. Specifically all allies. So if you do have a banner that took a hit, it actually heals your banner. If you have Bone Shaper who has a lot of summons out, it does heal all their summons. But keep in mind, the suffer damage is only if their health is raised. So if you heal someone at max health, it doesn't matter. Also, if they're perhaps max health and have a negative condition like poison or brittle, it does clear all those negative conditions off and you don't suffer the damage. The suffering the damage is for every ally who increases their health as a result of your ability. Given the unlimited range and how powerful this can be, and it has 1 experience on it, this is an incredibly strong top. I love this card largely because not only is the top incredible, but the bottom as well. If you are having trouble getting things into position, you actually have a summon where you control its movement. It has no attack and only 1 health, but you do have 2 movement that you can screw with every turn, or even you can drop it literally right next to you and able to fulfill positional requirements of some formations. If you just want to just drop this, boom, and do a formation attack on top, that's doable. And I've done that several times, usually with the somewhat uncommon lower initiative formation attacks, because there's a lot of formation attacks somewhere around the 70 range, which is just not great. However, keep in mind, since this is a summon you can control, you can tell it, hey, go ahead, boy, and just have it run ahead and take a hit. The cool part is, if you actually have it run ahead to enemies, it's possible that that's good movement they could have otherwise used to get to you, and may have to spend more movement to get to you. Alternatively, it could just soak up an attack. So it really depends on how you do it, but you can use this effectively like a stun or disarm. So as a result, both of the sides give experience, both of them give a very strong effect, and there's very different effects, but most builds are going to be using this for quite a bit of their career. Rallying Cry. This is another strong card, and the Banner Spear actually has a lot of these really great cards. Rallying Cry gives you access to both the formation attack and a banner on the 1 card. The top is pretty powerful. It's not that hard to pull off. It's not the easiest, but it's not hard. Just requiring an ally to be across from the enemy, but at a diagonal instead of directly across. The add a diagonal really helps because it does give you 2 hexes instead of being in exactly 1 hex. Also being on the other side is sometimes more annoying. As a result, this is actually not that hard to pull off, and it gives you attack 3, which is alright, 1 experience, decent, and a disarm, which is amazing. So, in fact, it gives you all 3 of those in 1 package. That's not hard to like pull off. As often as possible, use this attack just to mitigate incoming damage. That doesn't knock the banner because I've used it several times. Usually I'm a little bit more conditional with this banner, not just dropping it immediately and carrying it through this whole scenario. Don't get me wrong, I've done that before, it actually works, but only if you feel like you can afford to lose the disarm. The banner does give +1 to all of the banner's allies' attacks, just the first attack every turn. Because you are an ally to the banner, it does give +1 to your own attack, so this banner buffs you. In larger player accounts, I found the bottom to be scale a little bit better, but even then, it doesn't matter player count, the top is amazing and you should take this card. It's a very strong card. Unbreakable Wall. The bottom should look familiar if you've played Gloomhaven. If not, forget I said anything. The bottom doesn't have a pip on that enhancement though, so it's just a shield 1 for the rest of the scenario. And you have a -1 penalty to the range of all of your range attacks for the rest of the scenario. Given you only have 3 ranged attacks at level 1, one of which is pretty questionable, and only 4 ranged attacks amongst all of your cards level 2 through 9, there's just not a huge penalty there, especially since some of those attacks are kind of little asterisk conditional, so it's not even a big penalty. You do get 2 experience and shield 1 for the full scenario. So if you know you're going to be taking a lot of attacks, and some scenarios you just are going to, especially if there's a large volume of enemies, this one's an incredibly good card. When I said the class plays more like a 9-card class, that's because you do have some of these powerful losses that do last for the whole scenario, and this is one of them. The formation attack's still pretty strong. If you can get sandwiched between an enemy and a trap, you can knock them into it, but it just requires an ally next to you. And then you attack a big row with attack 3s and push 1. That's very strong. It's really hard to get all 3 enemies lined up in there, but usually you can get 1 or 2 this way pretty handily. One of the things is, since it does have a big line there, it is pretty easy to get at least 1 enemy in there, so you can at least do 1 attack 3 and get an experience and push it away. Javelin. Kind of a bland card, but it's actually strong. Attack 3, range 3 is really hard to complain about. It's generic, you're always going to want to be doing attacks, and range 3 is still pretty strong. It also gives you wind, and the air element is something you don't actually have a lot of generation for, and there's a few cards that use it, so if you are setting up to do that, and there's actually there's actually a good level 1 card that uses it, so the wind isn't entirely ignored, but there's a couple of cards that really could benefit from it. The bottom's actually pretty nice, because I've noticed that, like, oh no, are almost positioned for this formation attack. Sometimes my ally's kind of in the right spot, and I just move 1, pull the enemy in the spot I just left, and then the formation's fulfilled. Also, just something I found hilarious. It's not just happened once, but several times, where I've been fighting against Algox archers, which are way more annoying than the regular archers. And then they drop traps, and now I have to run over to them, and they're just shooting us from afar. Well, I've sometimes just like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move 1 towards them, pull them through their own trap, and then hit them across it. And that's made Algox Archer so easier. So if you see like, hey, I'm sandwiched between an enemy and some hazard or trap, pull them through it with Javelin, and then whack them. It's really nice. Speaking of cards that do use the wind element, deflecting maneuver. Even without wind, it's actually pretty solid. An attack 2 isn't that great, but then every enemy has disadvantage attacking you for the rest of the round. This is actually interesting when you pair it with Unbreakable Wall, because if you make all of the attacks have shield 1 and then all of them have disadvantage, this actually can turn a large amount of attacks into not that much damage landing on you. Consider options like that. If you do have wind, though, it does give an experience, nice, and an attack 3 with advantage, which is very good. So, plus to the top of this card. The bottom is a little bit more conditional. I think I'd like it a lot more, and I'm going to complain about these archers if it was initiative 14, because they have a very annoying card at initiative 14, and it's happened a couple times where I'm like, all right, I'm going to shield 2 against range attacks, and cool, you're going at 15, we're going at 14. I'm like, son of a... Anyway, not bitter about that at all. But because it's only ranged attacks and you have to be ready for it, it's not necessarily the greatest card, but the initiative's good, the top is very good, and the bottom is very strong if you can pull it off. So it's a good card. Tip of the Spear. This is going to be part of 2 cards, Tip of the Spear and the later card set for the charge, that you're going to be using for a while. Why? Because you have a late move 4 and an early move 4. This is a move 4 with the late initiative is just something you want. You're going to just use it for a while for that reason alone, which is fantastic. But there's a couple things that make this card very interesting, and reason why I like it. Attack 3, Pierce 3 is very strong. You do have very annoying enemies with shield in Frosthaven, like Burrowing Blades. They're actually incredibly annoying. So if you can use this can actually straight up drop Burrowing Blade normals at low level, which is amazing. Because they're so annoying, so just being able to drop them is fantastic. Also, because it actually does have range, you can potentially use an ally to get around people with melee retaliate. Even though it is a melee attack, if you do attack someone 2 hexes away, they don't melee attack on you. If they have range retaliate, I guess you have to deal with it. But also, potentially, if you line it up correctly, you could just nail 2 things with an attack 3. Because it has all these really good uses, and the bottom is a move 4, which is something you need, it's just kind of hard to complain about this card. I used it for a while, and it was funny when having to deal with some of these annoying cards drawing like, I'm shield and retaliating this turn, and I'm like, cool, I'll hit you from afar and pierce, and realize that there's other uses for this than just what's like the situations on the card, like, I'm going to kill flame demons, and sure, you will. But there are other points in a scenario where you realize, wow, this was really strong. Combined effort. This is another fantastic card. It's kind of hard to bitch about everything it does. The bottom is like a lot of small things. You move 2, and then 2 allies can move 2. So it's just all a little bunch of just small moves. But that's actually really good, especially if you need to be set up for a formation. That one's incredible. Also, if you do have like a banner in play, you can have it catch up with you after you move, as well as you have some allies that may need to catch up themselves. The top, however, is the easiest formation in the game. You just need to be next to an ally, and that ally needs to be next to the enemy. That's it. In attack 3, 1 experience, and wound is very good. Because of this, it's going to be on average like 4 damage, because the wound often easily getting up to 5 or higher. Yeah, it's incredible. It's a good amount of damage. It's easy to pull off. The initiative's fine. Like, yeah, it's okay, initiative, but like, this is just a good card. Both sides are good, and you're going to use it for a while. Solid damage or solid movement as a group. Set for the charge. If the top was blank, this card would be playable, which I think is hilarious. That just shows you how strong this is. Initiative 6, move 4. Super boring, but let's be real here. Initiative 6 beats almost all the annoying cards, and a move 4 is something you need. Just in general, playing Gloomhaven, I always try to bring at least 1, preferably 2, move 4s no matter what I'm playing. So, again, if it's blank, move 4, initiative 6. That's all you need to know. But the top is kind of like a retaliate, but for movements. That's kind of how I look at it, but it's just... if enemies are not next to you, and then during their movement move into at least 1 adjacent hex, they suffer 2 damage. This is important, and I'm going to mention Burrowing Blades again. Why? Because they were annoying. Burrowing Blades have high shield, so if an enemy moves past you or moves next to you that didn't start their turn there, boom, 2 damage. This is really cool if you need to break through those shields, so... just a heads up, it's actually pretty strong. I really love card design like that because the top also does need an early initiative, and the bottom just gives you a card that you always want. So it's just, I always like it to where something conditional but paired with something universal. Pincer movement. This is the hardest hitting movement at initiative 69. Nice. Unfortunately, you'll find this card is somewhat difficult to use. At least the bottom, however, is pretty useful. Because you can at least move 1 and loot. If you're not in the right hex, but the hex next to you is, you can at least get something. And loot's very important because you need to rebuild in Frosthaven. You need to build up walls. You need to build up buildings. So don't underestimate looting. Don't be like, oh, I guess we left those things in the last room. Pick stuff up, especially early game. You need to start building. So the loot cards are very important. The formation's hard to hit, though. Like, unlike the other 2 I was talking about earlier, there's, instead of an ally being on this hex or this hex, there's only 1 hex, and you have to be on exact opposite sides. So if you're running to an enemy right in front of you, you have to hope an ally's on the opposite side, or you have to get around to the opposite side, which may put yourself in vulnerable position to be on other attacks, or you have to coordinate, get an ally exactly on one side and you exactly on the other. That doesn't necessarily mean this card's super unplayable. In fact, it's actually pretty relatively easy, but to make sure that your attack lands and you need an ally in this exact position and for you to be at this, it's a little bit more annoying than some of the others. But attack 5 muddle's pretty strong. Muddle usually only averages about 1 point of mitigation, but ultimately the attack's strong, but you're going to use the bottom anyway, and there will be situations where the top does allow itself to be used. So I'm not knocking it, but just saying use with caution, but bring the loot. Regroup. This is a card I wanted to like more, and I do like it, but it usually just ends up being using between combat because it does have a low heal and regenerate, and then you can rest, and that's cool. There's a lot of other strong cards, so sometimes this ends up getting like hedged out a little bit, but if you actually need group healing, you should bring this. The top action is still pretty strong because with regenerate and heal, especially if you're timing it with a rest or between rooms, can actually really help pull people up. So something I was using for myself is, like, I brought myself down to like 3 health tanking. I'm like, okay, all right, we need to recover. So I moved to the next door, healed myself with this. So I'm up to 5, long rest, heal and 7, regenerate brought me up to 8. Then I kicked open the door, I still had regenerate on with 9. So I went from 3 to 9 just by using 1 card in the long rest. You can do stuff like that where suddenly you can go from almost like very worrisome to getting it back if you just time it correctly. 2 allies within getting 3 move is really good if you're already positioned well and you need to either catch them up or you need to have them in specific spots for formations. So between that and its strong initiative, keep in mind this actually can help mitigate some of those, including cards like Pincer Movement. So you can, hey ally, get in the spot for me. Okay, bam, heavy attack. It's good. Resolved Courage. I can see why this is an X card, but I take this basically every time. I love it. Initiative 10 is fantastic. It does give you another card that undercuts some of the annoying early cards, so that's important. Secondly, the bottom does say +1 to the next attack action of you or an ally. So keep in mind, it's only attack action, not all attacks for the round, but it's not just +1 to the next attack. So if your next attack hits multiple enemies, +1 to all of them, which is amazing. As something I do like to use with this, and this is a heads up, where I go late and have a long movement to get into position 1 round, then pop this next round, do a formation attack that hits multiple enemies, and then with the +1 attack on it, you usually try to get like turn like tip of the spear, where I see enemies right here, and I'm gonna just move past you, attack 4, or do unbreakable wall, attack 4. This is actually just really nice for initiative weaving. But the top is also really, really awesome. If you can just get in position, you can always just drop a summon behind you and do a big sweep of attack 3s with immobilize. The part that I don't like about this is it immobilizes, and then you're right next to him. So depending on what you're doing, if you could go really early, didn't need to drop the summon, you had an ally there, there's ways to immobilize him, get out. It's a little bit conditional, but even without the immobilize, just a bunch of attack 3s that's in a sweeping arc that's relatively easy to pull off is actually nice. It's actually really easy because it's got a good initiative with it, and you have banners and summons on bottom that you can just say, hey, guess what? Boom, formation passed. Incendiary Throw. So this is going to be the first card that I kind of complain about. You have to do damage for it. So it's just an attack 1 at range 3 and infuses fire. Fire is something you just don't use on any card. But if you do damage, you wound that enemy and all the enemies next to it, which is actually pretty strong. So if you've got them all gathered up, that's nice. But you have to do a damage, so if you draw a negative, could potentially be bad. So you can use this with Resolved Courage to do an attack 2, so as long as you don't draw a null or a -2, you can at least wound them and everyone next to them. But it's still we're talking about using a good card for a relatively small effect, and this one is very conditional. I'd say this one is almost always in the sideboard and never in my main rotation of cards. I've seen it used effectively, just I'm not that big of a fan of it. The bottom, it gives you a summon, but it's a lost summon. It does wound on attack, but it is only doing an attack 1 every time, and it's a melee summon with 5 health. I've just found this summon harder to use. It doesn't mean that it doesn't get its effort. I've actually seen the 5 health being used effectively, hitting a few attacks, wounding, and then eventually passing away. Farewell, Greg. But ultimately, it just feels like there's better uses for lost summons in the class than the Torchbearer. Driving Inspiration. This is a card I want to like more, but I do usually just lean on the banner. I'm like, dude, it's got a range 4, but it just ends up being an attack 2 with an element that you can't use. It's not bad, but the initiative 18's good, and the attack's okay. The banner, on the other hand, is situationally useful. I do bust it out on certain scenarios, or if you're playing a later build and want to keep everyone alive, and trust me, that's fun. But here's the thing. It says at the start of every player's action within range. So if you have multiple things that trigger at the start of actions, you choose the order. So if they're wounded, this will literally clear everyone's wound. While in this range, you are immune to wound. I think that's a little bit overlooked by this card. But also, it'll clear all poison, brittle, and bane. So we have more conditions that need to be healed off. Brittle and bane are also particularly brutal. Seriously, imagine being immune to bane. If you know what that is, every time you end your turn with bane, you lose bane and suffer 10 damage, which usually, for most of the time I've seen it, means you lose a card. Bane is basically you lose a card almost every time. But if you get healed, it goes away, and it doesn't block the heal like poison does. So this banner makes you immune to wound and bane. Yeah, I'll take that. But however, there's certain scenarios where bane is not very common at all. It's in fact quite rare. Wound is at least semi-common, but there's at least other ways to deal with it. So although this banner does a lot of good things, it's a little conditional. Always consider it when you're looking at the monsters for the scenario. Will this be a very powerful card? If it is, you probably should consider it. So for the builds, the Striker is going to cut Driving Inspiration, Incendiary Throw, and Regroup for its sideboard. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't bring Regroup. Regroup is very powerful for it, but Driving Inspiration, save it for specific scenarios, and Regroup only if your party needs the healing. Otherwise, the Striker can probably deal without it. Rotate it in as you see fit. The Defender is going to cut Pincer Movement, although you do need loot. It's harder for it to pull off. You probably don't want to put yourself out of position, and it's just harder to fit in, but also cuts Driving Inspiration and Incendiary Throw. Bring Driving Inspiration if you are going to do a scenario that has poison or wound. And the leader is going to cut at least temporary Resolved Courage as a sidebar card. Don't bring it for every scenario because you might not be able to get in front of everyone's face, immobilize them, and take the hits. Obviously sideboard Incendiary Throw and Deflecting Maneuver because you have to be taking hits, and if you're playing a leader build, you're probably not being the frontline tank. Level up cards. So level 2, Pinning Charge is a card I wanted to like and end up only liking it a little bit because I just like the other option a lot better. It does have a strong initiative, it does have a strong attack, but it does kind of conflict with itself. It's one thing where you're like, hey, I want to do a range attack and I want to, as many allies as you have around it, you get a bonus to attack. Fantastic. So you want to surround it, but then you also have an Immobilize it with wind. So either you immobilize an enemy at range and he still hits something, or you want to have enemies around. It just ends up being a little counterintuitive. Like, you can't get the full value of the card because it's very rare that you want to immobilize an enemy next to allies. The only situation I consider if you want to immobilize an archer next to it and it's going to shoot him in the face with disadvantage. Anyway, there's not necessarily a bunch of valuable options for this, but it could, if you have enemies that are away surrounded by enemies, it's got a very good source of damage. And at the very least, you could at least say, hey, I'm going to stop that guy over here from getting to us by this long range thing if you have like used javelin the previous turn to get air. The bottom does allow you to reposition a whole group, but it's a little bit more situational because you don't move yourself in the process. And I always love the cards that say you move and then allies can also move. It just ends up being, from my own experience, ends up being better. Meat Grinder. It's basically like Rallying Cry, but has 2 hexes. You're probably very rarely going to get enemies in both hexes, but at least if you get one, attack 4 wound is really hard to complain about. It's actually a direct upgrade. It's actually a direct upgrade to Combined Effort, which is only slightly harder to get. However, if you do get 2 enemies in there, that's a significant amount of damage dealt for a non-loss level 2. So because it's pretty easy, because you need an ally in this hex and just either of those 2 enemy hexes, it's a pretty easy formation. The bottom's actually really nice because you get a decent move and a heal. Being able to at least pop off poison wound or whatever and also have a decent move, this is kind of what we want, because Meat Grinder does have a kind of question mark on top. It's pretty easy to fulfill, but it's not necessarily the easiest. The bottom's just universal. So you have this is pretty likely, and this is incredibly valuable. The top probably has the highest potential, but the bottom of this is actually very reliably strong in basically every scenario. As a result, all the builds can take Meat Grinder, but if you actually do want to focus on the ranged builds, especially if the ability to surround enemies easily, go for Pinning Charge. It really can punish enemies pretty heavily if you have allies around it. Let Them Come and Head of the Hammer. So Let Them Come, we're going to talk about that first. This is a card I like it. I love it, love it, love it, love it. All you have to do is have an adjacent ally, and that's it. Then you have 3 hexes, and you have 1 enemy in one of them. Because it's just the 3 hex burst right in front of you, it's actually really easy to line up having an ally next to an enemy in this formation. This is incredibly easy. So the first thing is, heal both you and your ally too. That's fantastic. It gives you a little bit of recovery, which is strong. Then you attack any enemy that's in that formation, which is nice, and then any enemies who survive likely are poisoned. Whew. And you get an experience. And that's an awful lot on 1 non-loss card. And not only that, but this kind of breaks some of the annoying initiatives of formation attacks by giving you one at initiative 24, which is really strong. It's out of like Resolved Courage. There's very few formation cards that I actually like the initiative on it. But the Banner of Courage is also really strong, so this is another one of those where, hey, formation banner. I love those cards, they're fun. It's only adjacent though, so unlike the other banners we've seen, this only affects adjacent. However, Shield 1. Given the fact that shield stacks and you can get shield items, especially because by this level you should have the perk that gives you the ability to wear items that give you shield, and you can use this with Unbreakable Wall, you could potentially easily at least get to shield 2 or 3 or higher pretty readily by using this banner. So being able to reduce all incoming damage by 2 with this banner is really great. You do need to keep it next to you though, so it's not necessarily a freebie shield, but it also gives any other ally that are next to it a shield, so I do consider this to be a very good card. Head of the Hammer is weird. 3 experience is nice, but it's a top loss formation. But it's an annoying formation. It's not bad, but it's just only somewhat annoying. And then it's an attack 7 stun. A lot of times attack 7s will result in killing the enemy, and stuns are like, if it was like a stun that was a loss that didn't have as much of a condition tied to it, maybe I'd like it more, but ultimately I've found that I've really wanted to enjoy this, but I haven't. The bottom's a lot better, and that's what you want with a conditional top, but it's a level 3 card, and your air generator you only have 1 air generator, and muddling all adjacent enemies is really nice, so I'm not knocking that. So potentially move further, and muddle everything next to you. Great. And then the top is a little hard to use. Depending on what you're doing, probably everyone should take Let Them Come, but if you do want to be able to get in there and muddle all enemies, and may not be able to use the banner as effectively, you can use Head of the Hammer, but I do suggest just Let Them Come is a pretty easy pick no matter what build you're going with. Boldening Blow, yeah, it's a little tricky if you don't read the phrasing. It's only an attack. You see 4 red hexes and get excited, but you only perform an attack on one of the red hexes. So you need one enemy in one of the red hexes, that's it. And then you need, this is your first 2 ally one, and you need an ally in both of those blue ones. You bless both those allies. So here's the cool part about this though. If you like chuck the banner behind you, you can bless yourself. Yes. But seriously, you chuck out 2 blesses, do an attack 4, disarm that enemy that you just attacked, and get an experience. It's a little bit harder to pull off, but allies behind you isn't so bad, and there's 4 different hexes the enemy can be in. It's not super strict saying the enemy must be here. As long as the enemy is one of those 4 hexes and you have 2 allies behind you, you got it. So it's a little bit of an asterisk, but it's not nearly as hard as I anticipated. Also, blesses. People love it. The bottom's really strong. Move 2, and then you see, again, move, and then you reposition 2 allies. This is really good if you're towing a banner, as a heads up. So even if you can't get the top of that, being able to tow a banner for its aura or like pull an ally into position, never gonna knock the bottom of this. So really strong card. Air support's another really strong card, especially if you're dealing with annoying shielded enemies. This isn't such a puncture. Attack 4, Pierce 2, and it generates air, which is something you don't have a lot of. That's really great. So not only do you have a really universal card here, it's a direct upgrade to Javelin, and it's fantastic. The bottom summon is really strong though. It's a non-loss summon. It only has 1 health like your other summon, but it has fly 3. You don't get to control it, but at the very least, instead of like, oh, it's going to just fly 3 right at the enemy, but it will be pecking out attack 2s until it dies. It's very likely just going to soak up 1 attack, and until it does, it has an attack 2, and you can drop it behind you, get the benefit of having an ally there, have it fly ahead. So it's got so many uses for it. So I really love that little bird. He's so cute. Leader takes Boldening Blow, Striker takes Air Support, and Defender takes whichever one you want, but you lean a little bit towards Boldening Blow because being able to disarm the enemy is just incredibly strong. Hold the Line. This is the card you use to kick in the door. So at Initiative 5, fantastic. Shield 2 and then all allies. After you reveal all what the monsters are doing, you can position yourself where you want. You will be able to reduce a lot of the incoming damage and be able to say allies, hey, if you want to get in there and start hitting them, come in later or whatever, you're going to at least have shield 2 if you're next to me. A wonderful top. I'm not saying that this is like game breaking, but the fact that it does have this use that comes into play, because a lot of times when people are playing Gloomhaven or Frosthaven, the big iffy moments come when like, I'm opening the door, and that's usually when, oh crap, things went south. Being able to alleviate some of that stress and being able to go, okay, here's what we're doing. This helps. The bottom is another one of the very uncommon loss effects that isn't a permanent effect, but it is very strong, giving you repositioning ability, and you have a good shield and a very strong retaliate for the rest of the round. If you've used other shield effects, you could potentially just make yourself almost invulnerable to damage while punching out melee retaliates. Because maybe you see what they've drawn, you can at least bail out of this too, because it's just you're leaning on a bottom. And I've noticed that conditional bottoms where I'm like, oh, they're not attacking, never mind, I'm going to move 2, ends up being not as bad as like, well, I don't know what top I'm using now. So and even then, worst case scenario, it gives you the ability to go to niche 5. But it does compete with Explosive Epicenter. This attack is very busy. So all you need to do is just be adjacent to 1 ally. That's it. 1 ally. Then you attack everything next to them and you outside of those 2 hexes on either side. That's 6 hexes that you can potentially attack. So everything in there you perform an attack 3 against. Fantastic. You can push 1 any of the enemies in the area. Fantastic. And then you and your ally can move 1. This gives you a lot of positioning, and you get an experience too, but this gives you a lot of potentially repositioning. I've rarely had the push come into too much outside of like, hey, we need to clear spaces to get other people in. And I've rarely been able to get a large amount of people in there, but you can, I've seen a 3 pulled off, so 3 attack 3s is really strong. And as well as giving an ally free move 1. It's very nice. So here's the fun part about the bottom of Explosive Epicenter, and here's what I love about it. If you're towing a banner, and one of the problems with the Banner Spear class I've noticed is there's a lot of bottoms that you can use for other cool effects. There's a lot of powerful bottoms, but some of them are like you're going to be checking out like I'm going to get a bonus for this attack, or I'm going to be creating a summon, and sometimes you have to hold still for a round. Having the bottom of Explosive Epicenter, especially if you're towing a banner, you can just as long as there's an enemy within range 3, you and an ally can start moving forward. This also is really useful if you're like, well, I need to be in this specific formation. And the part that's really nice about this, remember how I was complaining about like, well, you're going to mobilize everything next to you. Well, what about then? All right, once during your turn. All right, cool. Let's all bail out. And now the immobilized enemies have nothing to attack. That's neat as hell. So being able to move in, mobilize, and move out is another thing that I've really hardly ever seen discussed, but when I've seen it played in action, it's not common, but when I've seen it happen, I'm like, oh, this is cool. Defender takes hold the line unless you really want explosive epicenter, but everyone else picks the explosive epicenter. The top's just very easy to fulfill and potentially can do a lot of damage. Bolstering Shout. I kind of wanted to like this more, but this is one of those cards that's night and day if you have air or not. A heal 3 at range 3. If you can heal 2 things, heal 3 at range 3 and regenerate them both, that's great. But you need air, and there's only 2 ways to generate air, and one of which is a level up card. As a result, I find it really hard to actually pick this. The bottom is a very nice move, and you can pull up to 2 enemies within range 3 of you to you. So then it's nice to, again, remember I was talking about Javelin? This is a direct upgrade to it. So instead of moving 1, you're moving further, and you are pulling 2 enemies to you. Amazing. So you can potentially drag 2 people through traps. I've not seen that happen, but hey, you know, stranger things have happened. So I do really like the bottom here. Ultimately though, it does compete with Barricade, which I like a lot more. Having an ally on both sides can be rough, but at levels like at level 6, you've got enough repositioning that it should be able to pull it off. On the initiative 16 is actually really great. Boom! Attack everything in the line. You and both allies get shield 1 for that round, and you get an experience, and you get to attack 3 on all those enemies, and then every enemy in the formation gets wounded. Whew! This is one of the ones where I'm like, oh my god, there's a lot of hexes. This one's actually easier to pull off, especially if you are literally like, hey, let's create a barricade of bodies there. Like, hey, I'm next to my buddy, drop a banner, swing across there. I don't know what that sound effect was. Formation banner. They really love that card design, don't they? Banner of Valor is fantastic. Here's the funny part I like about this. Like, what if you could say reliably force an enemy to draw a null every round? Wouldn't that be just insane? What if you had a banner that basically did that? So the first source of damage between one person within range, which is just adjacent, the damage is ignored. Now, so that means the first attack every round does no damage as long as you're lurking next to the Banner of Valor. Especially in 2-player counts. In 2-player counts, because of the low amount of volume of attacks, this has incredibly good scaling with low player count. I'm not saying that this is bad in higher player count, so if you're playing 4-player, it's still good. But in 2-player, it's almost like disarm the first enemy near you. And this is one of those banners that I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna tow this and be near it the whole scenario. I didn't even use a shield, but just saying like, holy crap, just like that misses, we're gonna trade blows, that misses, we're gonna trade blows. You can't hit me. It's fantastic. So it doesn't completely make you invulnerable, because as soon as you start getting surrounded, every attack after that just doesn't do anything. So it's one of those that doesn't scale with number of monsters or number of players. This one just has one powerful effect every turn. All builds lean towards Barricade unless you have some decent air generation reliability. You can pick Bolstering Shout if you want to bring that support, but I strongly suggest everyone bring Barricade. Lead from Afar. So I do actually like the summon. Because it's level 7, this is one of the summons where in lower levels it would be amazing, but level 7 it only ends up being pretty good. If you are fighting a scenario where you're avoiding shielded enemies, being able to say, hey, guess what, my archer is going to toss an attack 2 every turn, and also, if they survive, likely, they get muddled, strong. Also, range 4 means you don't have to spend too much effort protecting the summon. The bigger problem is sometimes in larger scenarios where you have to leave the summon behind. It has a somewhat lower move, but I haven't actually had problems with playing with the archer here. Now, the range 4 on this means you're going to at least, your range and the of the top attack and the archer are going to stay out of range, but if you actually have the ability to, like more of a summon focus build, or at least have some allies, you can dumpster enemies with +2 attack for every ally adjacent to the target. So if you can get just 2 enemies next to it, boom, a non-loss attack 6 at range 4. Woo! I did find it a little bit harder to use, but you have to have the right setup for it. But again, remember how I said you have those formation attacks? Sometimes the formation is, hey, you two, you're getting a free move 3, run at the enemy, cool. have fun. It does compete with Tri-Thrust, what an interesting name. The attack formation looks hard, and that's because it is. You have to have allies in a very specific formation around this enemy. A non-lost stun on one of the Frosthaven starters. Hey, look, it's here. It is hard to set up, but it is tied to an attack 7 and gives you an experience. That's pretty nice. The initiative's 27 though, so that's pretty nice. Luckily though, solid move, which is great. And then you attack 1, which isn't great, but you target up to 3 adjacent enemies. So here's the cool part. You can actually just get right into position and do a bunch of attack 1s. And by this point, you are at level 7. You should have actually a pretty strong modifier deck. And not only that, but the Banner Spear actually pulls interesting things. Like they've got pushes, rolling shields, and other effects. It actually has disarms in there. So sometimes just drawing a bunch of cards is really strong. If you do have air, the enemies don't need to be adjacent. You could attack 3 enemies that are within 2 hexes of you, which makes this a lot easier. I'd say everyone picks Tri-Thrust, but if you do want to play with lead from afar, I don't think the striker build should not take it, because that ranged attack can just dumpster enemies if you can surround them. Additionally, that summon is pretty strong, so but it's a little bit more conditional. The Tri-Thrust bottom is really great. I'm purely picking it for the bottom. The top's harder to set up, but it is non-loss, so if you can get the allies in the right spot, attack 7 and stun is brutal. It's okay in 4-player, but still, it was more annoying than anticipated. Taunting Howl. So I'm going to talk about the bottom first. So let's pretend the top is blank for a second, even though it's really, really, really neat. Initiative 11, move 3 and give 2 allies move 3s. That is so much movement, because you've seen them like move 2s, and like some move 3s, but you don't move. You move 3, 2 allies move 3. Whoo! That's a lot of repositioning. That's what you want, and initiative 11, so that beats a lot of the annoying stuff. Congratulations, you have a very universally good bottom. The top is a fantastic loss. You get a big shield and you pull them to you, and it's great, so at least you can be sure that you're taking the damage. But it's kind of like a level 8 loss, and I want a better effect than that, I guess is what I'm saying. So I've always found this to be a little underwhelming. Sweeping Aid. Do you remember that really fun level 1 formation from Resolved Courage? What if the ally was next to him and you were behind them? See, isn't that cool? So this is fantastic. You get that 3 hex sweep, and all you have to do is be behind an ally. This is a little bit easier because at least you can guarantee yourself to try to go early and then tell the ally to get out as you like, weep. You're like, hey, I'm going to go early. I'm going to jump behind you, attack all those enemies. Get out because I'm going to immobilize them. Or you can use Explosive Epicenter to say, hey, by the way, now that I've gone, I'm going to back up. You pull into my spot. Cool. All those immobilized enemies, bye. But you do an attack 4, pierce 2. Annoying shielded enemies, boom, this helps. Multiple enemies, boom, this helps. I just really like this card. It's incredible. The initiative isn't great. Another one of those 70-ish ones, but yeah. The bottom, though, is really powerful because it gives you a heal, then a move, then another heal. The cool part is if you've like oh, I'm poisoned. Cool. Remove the poison move and then actually heal yourself. Or you can say, hey, I'm going to heal this ally, move over here, heal this other ally. Other than that, it's just the bottom. It's just really hard to pass up. So, wow. Both halves of this card so great. The leader and striker both take Sweeping Aid, but the defender can pick Taunting Howl because not only does the repositioning help, but if you want to really help your group out, the top can be pretty conditional. If you really just want the heal, though, for the defender build, taking Sweeping Aid is not a bad pick. And the level 9 cards. Take No Prisoners. This is the one I really like. The other one's a little bit of an asterisk, and I'm really sad that that's on a level 9 card. But Take No Prisoners, fantastic. Now look at this. You need 2 allies behind you. And then you need 1 enemy in that 9 hex pattern, just 1. It's going to be actually hard to not get multiple enemies in that pattern. 9 hexes. All you have to do is 2 allies behind you, and you have plenty of summons. So you know what you do here? Get 2 allies behind you and just blow up the room. If you have like Resolved Courage or any other like power potions, stuff that affects a whole attack action, attack 3 everything in here, and then every survivor gets poisoned, which means they're more vulnerable to other attacks. This just murders. And the bottoms too. First off, Banner of Doom is just a cool name. I love it. But everything within range 4, every enemy, as soon as they start their turn, suffers 1 damage. Given the amount of wounds you have, it's actually really easy to wound and then get them near range 4 of it. And it's not just like 1 attack 1 or something. It's suffer damage, so it breaks through shields. And it's every enemy that starts its turn within range 4. Jeez. This is a really strong banner. It adds up real fast, and it's actually with 9 health. It's usually not going to die in 1 hit if you have an oops moment. Hail of Spears is something I'm a little bit less enthusiastic about. Attack 5 at that range is still pretty solid, but depending on the number of banners next to you, you get to target multiple enemies. So if you actually have 2 banners next to you, which could be a thing, especially at this level, you're going to be definitely over 15 damage. But 15 damage on a non-loss is great. But then you have to teleport the banners to them. You have to teleport the banners to the targets you just attacked. The part that really gets me here is those banners are vulnerable, and you could potentially putting them in situations where you're going to lose them. So I don't like that part. But at least maybe you'll be able to go early the next round and then scoop them up. The initiative 44 is not doing it any favors, though. The bottom does get you your banners back, but then it's a loss. So you'd want to get those back, because maybe you toss them at enemies, now you got to get them back. But now you lost the top action. And this is not recoverable, so you can't even like goof around it and like trying to get it back in creative ways. And it doesn't help with stamina, because this is a loss that gives you 2 losses back, which is great, but it just puts them immediately into play, so it actually hurts your stamina. Don't get me wrong, it's still really powerful, the idea of, hey, I've got 2 cards in my loss pile, let's not only just bring them back, but put them into play immediately. That's strong, but it's, I don't know, it's really hard to compete with Take No Prisoners, so all the builds take it unless you really want to go for a banner build and say, go for Hail of Spears. It's not necessarily bad, it's just harder to use. Perks. We're going to go through all the perks now. So first off, removing -1 for rolling cards, fantastic. Keep in mind, because we have a different way of doing rolling modifiers, and how it interacts with advantage, means that rolling modifiers are no longer stuff to be like kind of afraid of, especially for playing certain classes that had lots of rolling modifiers and slim decks like you had in Gloomhaven, where sometimes you roll into nulls and just be really frustrated and say, why did I take these rolling modifiers? Not the case anymore. Not only does this add rolling modifiers, rolling shield is something I usually don't like, but it adds rolling shield at the expense of removing -1s. It's really hard to turn that down. This is a fantastic perk. The next ones I'm not so enthused about. It replaces +0s with +0s, but then that attack gets +1 increased by the number of allies adjacent to the target. Given the fact you have formation attacks, this turns a lot of them from +0s to +1s, but then sometimes +2s or 3s. But there's also a pretty easy way by other classes to turn 0s into +2s that don't need conditions, to the point where I'm actually just not really enthused about this. This is probably one of your lowest priorities. +1 in disarm is actually really nice. It's conditional crowd control is hard to really utilize, but it's kind of hard to bitch about adding more +1s that also disarm enemies. +2 is nice because the damage is good. The push is situational, but remember, if you don't want to do the push, you don't have to do the push. You can at least just add more +2s to the deck, and that's strong. The rolling +1s and heals are pretty good. It depends on where you want to add them. Rolling +1s are never going to hurt. Rolling heals self. If your party needs more damage, take the rolling +1s. If you need more survivability, take the heals. It's actually especially good if you're like, oh no, I'm poisoned, and finally draw it. It doesn't happen often, but it's funny when it happens. So now we're going to get into the non-attack modifier perks, and we have the armor wearing perk. This one's actually really strong because not only do you get the ability to equip the items that will give you shield and other heavy armors, but it does remove a -1 in the process, making it, I think, the strongest. I actually don't like it when you add +1s. I'm like, give me +2s or remove +0s, but removing a -1, absolutely, give me that every time. The next 3 are actually very interesting. The long rest one's super neat. Now, if you find yourself short resting more often than not, you're not going to be using this, but you give a free movement to an ally. This is pretty good if you're trying to tow a banner, or if you need an ally to be you've just long rested, and you can say, hey ally, get a free move to get over there. It's helpful because every long rest gives you an ally a free movement, or you can at least set up, say, hey, I'm going early, and I'm giving you a free movement to move there, and I need you there for a formation. This means that since it's outside of ability cards, you could potentially set yourself up with just long rests to help the allies get into position. I do like the next one more, because every time I've played Banner Spear, I've been the one to have to kick in the door, and I've had to react to that. So this one's really great because when you kick in a door, you get another 3 hexes of movement. Given I usually try to pair it with shields and other things with this, or at least ranged attacks, sometimes I need to be in the right position. And this can turn your movement into a move 6 or move 7s. And there's some really crazy rooms with really weird stuff where you can run into some nooks by obstacles where enemies are I have to surround you, and I'm no longer running at the allies or stuff. It's just depending on the scenario, this is insane. Or run right at the archers on the other side of the room and just punch them in the face and being like, hey, I'm actually ready. Or you can see that what they draw and react to it and realize I need to be in this exact hex. It gives you the movement. Or even if you're I only have a default move 2, congratulations, that's a move 5 if you're opening a door. Gosh, it's just so good. I really love this perk. The bottom perk is a little bit more like conditional because you have to activate it. You have to remember to activate it, and it costs 2 perks. But it does say, like, it effectively, for me, counts as like another item slot, and the item says gain shield 2 for the rest of the round, and spend it. That's it. But shield 2 for a whole round is very good. Given the fact it's not tied to an ability, you can still play 2 cards and give yourself shield 2, and it doesn't take up an item slot, so it just takes up perk slots. So it's effectively moving similar effects from other places to this. You have to remember to use it, and you have to be in positions to. And it costs 2 perks. So there's a lot of and, but the payoff often is actually really powerful, especially if you are kicking open doors and saying, oh no, I need to get here, but we're all going to take hits. Saying, wait, I got this covered is really nice. I'm not necessarily saying everyone should take it, but for people who are like defender roles, should probably lean more towards this. So hopefully this helps you learn how to play the Banner Spear. It does give you some build options, and there's more than just that. And I was just creating the rigid builds as kind of like a stylistic choice, but ultimately you can hybrid any of them, and I hope this helps you get through, because Frosthaven has a lot of stuff going on and a little bit more complex than Gloomhaven. So be sure to drop a comment letting you know, like, hey, this is a build you want to play, or if you actually have played the Banner Spear, let us know, or if you just have a favorite card. I love hearing that. I just want to say thank you to all of our Inox tier patrons. You are all amazing. I'm going to be adding a few more updates because we do have some Frosthaven stuff. There's going to be a lot more of a ramp up of Frosthaven stuff coming soon for reasons. So I'll be updating patrons first with that. So be sure to subscribe to Patreon if you want to support that. Also, if you want to check out our Discord, we have a community in which we talk about Gloomhaven some of the time. So I just want to thank all of you for being wonderful patrons, and thank all of you for watching.